So in this case, you want to write the equation. Write the equation of the circle in standard form. All right, so write the equation of the circle in standard form. Now I'll give you the equation of standard form. The equation of standard form is x minus h squared plus y minus k squared equals r squared. That's what it is. That's the equation in standard form. In order to write this equation in standard form, you need to know two things. What two things must you know? The center and the radius. Those are two things you need to know. Well, in terms of this right here, these are the endpoints of the diameter of a circle. And remember, a circle has how many diameters? An infinite number. This is just one of them. So if you look at this circle, negative 4, 6 is here, and then 1, 8 is here. So if you look at this diameter, the center, remember the diameter goes to the center, right? And the center is located where on the diameter? The midpoint. So let's say it's here. I'm kind of estimating where it is. So I'm going to draw this circle. This is not a very good circle, but it'll do. And there are an infinite number of diameters, right? All these are diameters. There's an infinite number of these things. But all I know are the endpoints here. This is 1, 8, and this right here is negative 4, 6, correct? That's all I know. I don't know the endpoints of any of the other diameters. I just know that one. So if I want to find the equation of this circle, given this diameter, I've got to know the center and what else? The radius. Well, how can I find the center? What is the center here? The midpoint of this line segment. So you're going to use what formula? The midpoint formula. So let's call this x1, y1, x2, y2. So the midpoint, capital M, midpoint, the midpoint formula is where you add the x coordinates together. So x1 plus y1 divided by 2. You take half of it. And then you do the same thing with the y coordinates. I'm sorry. Did I say x2 or? I'm sorry. You add the x's together. x1 plus x2 divided by 2. And then you add the y's together. y1 plus y2 divided by 2. All right. And so you get negative 4 plus 1 divided by 2, correct? And then the y is going to say 6 plus 8 divided by 2. And then simplify this. You would get negative 3 halves, comma, and what is that? 14 divided by 2 is 7? All right, so that's my midpoint of the diameter, which happens to be the center. This is also the center, correct? So I found my h and I found my k. Now all I've got to do now is find the radius. So I got to find the radius. So if you were to look at this circle again, the radius, what do you know about the radius? It's half the diameter. So once you find the length of the diameter, you just take half of it. So remember, the radius is the length of the diameter divided by 2. So I just got to find the length of the diameter first. So how do you find the length of the diameter? What formula are you going to use?
Distance formula.
The distance formula. So the distance formula is the square root of, now I'll give you the formulas, you just need to be able to use them. So there's no reason why you should not get 10 points on this one. That one you should be able to do. The absolute value you may struggle with, but if you can remember those two things I told you about, the absolute value of x less than 2, absolute value of x greater than 2, then you should be okay. So with the distance formula, you're going to subtract the x-coordinates squared plus subtract the y-coordinates and then square it, and then take the square root of that. So that's going to be the square root of x2. x2 is 1. Subtract x1, which is a negative 4. Whatever that is, I'm going to square it. Plus y2, which is 8. Subtract y1, which is 6, squared. So 1 subtract negative 4 is 5. So I get 5 squared. 8 subtract 6 is 2, so I get 2 squared. So that's the square root of 25 plus 4, which is the square root of 29. So that's your diameter. So then the question becomes this. This right here, does that go here? No. The formula says I've got to take the radius and square it. Well, that's not the radius, that's the what? Diameter. So the radius then would be the square root of 29 divided by 2. That's the radius. Now what I would do next is without going straight to the answer, I would then do this. I would go back to this formula and write out what I know. So I get x minus h. What's h? Negative 3 halves. Right, leave it as a fraction. Negative 3 halves squared plus y minus k. K is 7 squared equals the radius. What's the radius? All that squared. So that's what you should have written. That's not the answer, but that's what you should have written. Now the answer is going to be this. You need to know that x subtract the negative 3 halves means what? X plus 3 halves squared plus y minus 7 squared equals, now the square root of 29 over 2 times itself, because that's what that means, square root of 20 over 2 squared. The square root of 29 times square root of 29 is what? 2 times 2 is 4, and that goes here. That's your answer. All right. So you're going to have one where you're given the diameter. Okay. Now the other thing you need to be able to do, which we did the last class here, is this. Okay. Suppose you're given the equation of a circle. And let's say it's x squared plus y squared minus 8x plus 2y plus 2 equals 0. So you give it the equation of the circle. Is this the standard form of the equation of a circle? No. What form is this?
General form.
General form of a circle. You need to rewrite it in what form? Standard form. So given the equation of this circle, the direction is going to say this. Write the equation in standard form. So you're going to write the equation in standard form. So that's where you're going to have to complete the square on the x's and complete the square on the y's. Now in your test, you're not going to complete the square on a quadratic equation, like solving a quadratic equation. So on your test, in terms of solving quadratic equations, you're going to have 1 or 2 where you have to factor, and then 1 or 2 where you have to use quadratic formula. But here you do have to use completing the square to rewrite it in standard form. All right, what's the first thing you have to do here, though?
Rewrite it
Okay, so tell me what to write.
No.
Put all the x's together.
X squared minus 8x.
Okay, leave some space.
Space.
Plus,
Y squared plus 2y.
leave some space, and then you put that constant on the other side.
-2.
So -2. All right, so that's where we're at. Now this is where you complete the square. You can complete the square in the x's, and then complete the square in the y. So let's start with the x's. So remember, when you complete the square, you take the coefficient of x. What's the coefficient of x? -8. What do I do to that -8? Divided by 2. Whatever that is, I'm going to do what to it? Square it. So that's -4 squared, which is 16. What do I do to that 16?
Add 16 to
Add 16 to both
both sides.
sides. So put it with the x's like this, and then put it on the other side just like this. So you add 16 to both sides. Now you complete the square and the y's. Now remember, the whole purpose of completing the square, before we go into the y's, the whole purpose of completing the square is to make this a perfect square trinomial. In other words, you can write it as a binomial squared. So x squared minus 8x plus 16 is what binomial times itself?
X minus 4.
X minus 4. You can always check yourself, because what's a -4 times a -4? Positive 16. That's what you wanted. That's a 16. So don't say x minus 16, because 16 times 16 is not 16. Let's do the y's. What's the coefficient of y?
2.
2. What do I do to that 2?
Divide by 2.
Divide by 2. Whatever that is, I'm going to do what to it? Square it. What's 2 divided by 2?
1.
What's 1 squared?
1.
1. So I do what to both sides?
Add 1.
Add 1 to both sides. So now, so you can say plus, so now this is a perfect trinomial. So what is the binomial here? Y plus 1 squared. Equal, now what's this over here?
15.
Yeah, that's -2 plus 16 plus 1 is 15. So that's your equation in standard form. That's the equation in standard form. Once it's in standard form, then you can tell me the center. What's the center? 4, -1. What's the radius? Yeah, so you got to remember your formula. The formula says, remember your formula, x minus h squared plus y minus k squared equals r squared, right? So the 15 is not r. 15 is what?
R squared.
R squared. So before, in a previous section, you solved this quadratic equation using the square root property. Remember that? So that's why we learned the square root property partially for this as well. So you took the square root of both sides, but remember when you solved an equation using the square root property, you got that plus or minus. Remember that? That's on your test. But here, you don't do the plus or minus, you just do the what? The square root, because this is distance. Distance is always what? Positive. So r is the square root of 15. So that's your radius. So the radius is not 15, the radius is the square root of 15. Okay? So it's in standard form. You got to remember that the radius is the square root of this number. Whatever that number is, you take the square root of it. All right, so that's your kind of review. So we went over 2 problems here, and then on absolute value, one of them. So that's 30 points right there. So you got your 30 points. All right.